Greetings, I am Gresham's at arm, and welcome back to Gresham Reads Monster Blood Tattoo Book 1, Foundling, by D.M. Cornish. So the last time, Rosamund had finally stumbled across the simple truth of the matter, of how he had boarded the wrong boat. Through careful manipulations via the shrewd boatmaster, Poundage. And throughout his trip, he had seen both his first monster as well as his second, though he only saw a silhouette of the second one, as well as evidence of what is referred to as the dark trades, or black market as we would understand it as. Excuse me. But as we got to a certain point, upon reaching a sort of rival city of excuse me. I simply was adjusting my seating. But a rival city of this very city that Rosamund himself grew up in. Apparently, the usual inspector that Poundage had an in with was either discovered to be allowing the dark trades, or had truly been reassigned to another location. I'm not sure if we'll ever figure that out, but either way, this resulted in Poundage and his crew attacking the inspectors who came aboard and then fleeing. Sorry about that. However, this resulted in I believe the battlements of the gate were basically put into effect to live up to their name and began to open fire on the ship. Rosamund, of course, took the opportunity presented to him and threw himself off the ship. Of the, what was it called? Let's see. It is the spindle that they were docked at, and the vessel. What was the vessel called? Not the hogshead, but I mean the type of vessel. Okay, let's see. Cromster, that's what it's called. Cromsters. He had leapt from the Cromster and into the river in order to escape from Poundage. Forgive me, it took me a little longer to find that than I thought it would. And now we will see what Rosamund's actions accomplish and what consequences it might hold. But first, before we begin the chapter, there is the usual definition at the start of the chapter. This one is Throod. Throod is the sensation of watchfulness and awareness of the land or waters about you. Though no one is certain, the most popular theory is that the land itself is strangely sentient, intelligent, and aware, and resents the intrusions and misuses of humankind. Paltry Throod, the mildest kind, can make a person feel uneasy, as if under unfriendly observation. The worst kind of throod, pernicious throod, can drive a person completely mad with unfounded terrors and dark paranoias. So in other words, it is that feeling of being watched. Interesting. And I'm not surprised if the equivalent of Mother Nature would be very dissatisfied with humankind, considering all that they do.
Yeah, we humans are kind of assholes, aren't we?
I mean, you're not that bad, Darkus.
Dude, you don't have to cover up. We humans are assholes. We're honestly too destructive for our own good.
Anyways, on with the chapter. Meetings on the road to high vesting, chapter 6. The plunge into the river was like a stinging slap to the face, and his heavy proofing tugged Rosamund deeper. Yet the valise somehow floated, and despite the weight of its contents, prevented him from sinking altogether. He bobbed to the surface and spluttered and gasped. He could swim, though a lot of people could not, a benefit of living in a marine society in a city by a river. And swim he did, as he had never done before. The current was slow, but enough to pull him away from the spindle and away from the fleeing hogshead. He splashed and flailed for shore, terrified he might end up part of the dinner of some bottom-dwelling river boggle. The cromster had straightened somehow, and was well distant from Rosamund now, smoke trailing from some unseen fire, still making good its flight downstream. Shots from the vessel popped, and those of the river gate thundered. More casualties were inflicted on the hogshead crew by accurate fire, while misses sprayed gouts of water about. With a mighty slap, one of the misses struck the water off to his right. He could see it clearly, a rapid round shadow skipping once on the surface of the river before plunging with a mighty chalk into the water. With a panicked surge, he pushed for the bank. The humor carried him toward its eastern side. The muddy shore was almost treeless, except for a thicket of tall and knotted she-oaks a little further downstream. Roots poked into the water, and graceful boughs hung their long needles thickly into the same. It was an obvious landmark, and Rosamund struggled towards the tree as hard as he could. There was no one to be seen on the bank. He prayed that those in the spindle had not seen him leap from the hogshead, and would not see him climb out of the river and into those trees. He would be associated with the bargemen of the hogshead in the wrong way, he was sure, and that was trouble anyone would want to avoid.
Excuse me.
Seems we both have a cough today.
Yeah, probably something we ate. Bit of phlegm build up.
More than likely. His feet finally found grip on the slimy riverbed. Dragging the valise from the current's toe, he waded ashore among curtains of sewing needle leaves. Once out of the water, he staggered and lay on the grassy bank in the shadows of the copse, sobbing, shivering, thoroughly lost. For a long while he remained dazed, unwilling to move from memory of the violence just gone and the fear of violence ahead. How could he possibly survive alone out here in the wilds, where all the monsters lived? Surely he would be eaten by the next gluttonous nickard across his path. If not today, then tomorrow or the next day. It was just a matter of time. The thumping of great guns ceased. The hogshead had disappeared behind a bend in the river. Rosamund watched from where he lay as two dark vessels moved out from their moorings by the spindle and headed downriver in pursuit. They were monitors, much larger than any crumster, and more than a match for the hogshead. He continued watching until they slowly disappeared around the same bend. With a sigh, he lay back, his mind blank. He had no idea what to do next. Come on, think, Rosamund schooled himself, like Master Franstad would do. It occurred to him that the mysterious Mr. Germanicus would still be expecting him in the fortress city of High Vesting. Just how was he going to get there? Just how he was going to get there was the troublesome part. There was no going back to the spindle to ask for another barge. He would probably be recognized and certainly prosecuted. There was no other option. He was going to have to walk. But walk to where? Rosamund tried to marshal his thoughts. All about, the land was uniformly flat, mile upon mile of broad farming land. The most obvious landmark was the black threat of the spindle to the north, and the small wood growing about its eastern bastions. Rosamund was grateful for the stand of she-oaks that sheltered him now, for he could see little other cover for miles about. He could well recall how the maps of the back of the almanac showed the region to be almost featureless. Excuse me. Of course, my almanac. He took up his waterlogged satchel. Murky water drained from a seam at the bottom. With a grimace, Rosamund looked inside. It was a sodden mess. He gloomily took out his almanac and sat it in his lap. Now I'll find out just how waterproof this is. He gingerly opened the cover to find the waxy pages had survived their dunking. They were not even slightly damp. There were no illegible smears on the print, not even a smudge. What a wonderful gift! Encouraged, he looked up the map of the region among the handful of other charts at the rear of the book. A thin line of communication showed from the spindle to High Vesting. It was evidence of a road. Winston Mill showed closer, but he had been told to go to High Vesting first. So it was south to the port, some 80 miles away in a straight line, though much longer by road. It's a long walk, but I reckon it's what Master Franstad would decide. And that settled it for him. Rosamund began to plan. First, he would inspect the rest of his belongings. Then, when it was evening, head out first east and then south until he found the road. That spidery line on the map, hidden among the black trunks and dense needles. Rosamund struggled off his jackcoat in his own arms. I think I misread that part. Oh no, never mind. 2 pages got stuck together, my mistake. Rosamund struggled off his jackcoat and hung it over several branches to dry. Although it had saved his life, saturated, it was unbearably heavy. Freed of its constriction, he shivered with the cold and set to work. The execution of the first part of his plan was straightforward enough. Several things had been ruined by the water. Most of his remaining food, the crust of rye bread, was soaked and dirty. The dried must, dry no more, was still edible, but would not keep for long. The slats of portable soup were sticky, as they were starting to dissolve. Happily, the gherkins and the fortified sack cheese had survived. The apples he had eaten days ago. His instructions and letters of recommendation, written in ink, were smudged beyond legibility. The bill of folding money that was His advance on wages was now a useless sodden clump. Remarkably, the sealed paper had remained sealed. His other book, the Lexicon of Words, was a swollen ruin twice as thick as it used to be, its spine bulging. Much of the ink had spread, making words fuzzy, although fortunately still readable. Of the repellents, only the bother salts were affected, now doses of sludge inside their little sacks. Having never encountered bother salts before, Rosamund had no idea whether or not they were still useful, but decided to keep them anyway. The restoratives remained unspoiled in their tiny bottles, as did Crumpollin's X-Stinker in its brown clay bottle. As for clothes, shirts and smalls and all, and for most other things in his possession, these were wet but still intact. Unfortunately, though, his hat and his cudgel were gone. And, Rosamund thought regretfully, Verlaine once said that one should never travel abroad without a hat. What is with the obsession with hats? I'm genuinely curious about that now. Let's see. Forgive me for that. Tipping water from the valise and the satchel, Rosamund arranged his belongings about him so that they might dry. He would repack them before he set out, damp, ruined, or otherwise, preferring them wet and wrecked to lost. Hanging his wet skin next to the jackcoat, so it too might dry, he lifted it up his shirt and messily splashed X-Stinker on the sodden bandage. Tucking himself back in, he settled himself in the most secluded nook to wait out the rest of the sunlight. After 5 days on the Kromstar, he had become accustomed to the subtle movements of the vessel in the water. His senses still pitched and swayed gently as he lay there, almost rocking him to sleep. Some small bird squeaked 3 times, then shot away with a whir. Rosamund blinked heavily. In his hand, he gripped a bottle of tyke oil. With the bother salts ruined, it was all he had to ward off monsters. At the first sign of one, he would splash it in its face and run. With this determination, the memory of the frightening stories told by the older boys at the Foundling came unsought. Night, they used to say, was when monsters grew bold, when the knickers roamed and the boggles hunted. He had not the slightest doubt that night was when all sorts of strife could occur, but night would also allow him to travel unnoticed by people, especially those in the spindle. At that moment, search parties from the Rivergate scared him more. Hugged in his own arms, Rosamund managed to doze off the rest of the afternoon, his chest hurting where the musket ball had struck. At one point, he woke and thought he could reckon a faint pounding of guns again, carried from a long way off by gentle afternoon breezes. The monitors must have caught the hogshead. When evening came, he put back on his clothes, now dry enough to wear. He gathered his near-dry gear and packed it all once more, tidy and secure. He had watched Master Francis do. Reluctant to leave, he took his time, gently shaking both valise and satchel several times to test for unnecessary rattles, and repacking them again and again, till there was none. All the time, a gurgling knot of fear churned in his middle. For a time, he was stuck between the terror of the dark and the unknown dangers ahead, and the anxiety of still being so close to the spindle. In the end, out of sheer frustration, He set out from his hide of she-oak needles, his pulse pounding in his ears with every step. He walked as quickly as he might across the too soft earth of the plowed open field that went back from the riverbank. To his left, lantern and limb-thorn lights of yellow, orange, and green twinkled in a deceptively friendly way all along the walls, and in the slit windows of the spindle. Dark shadows lurked beyond its eastern end, the shapes of the trees that made small wood there. A distant line of lamps extended east from the river gate through, and beyond this wood. Then turned south where a flat open field and pasture spread to the horizon. This land offered easy traveling, but little cover. The faintly sparkling line was evidence of the road Rosamund had counted on to take him south to High Vesting. The lights much worse than those he would be employed to service on the Wormway. It was hard to see, but he went on, keeping the lantern line to his left. He did not cease. When it ceased, he did not stop, but kept walking till the last glimmer was lost in the distance and night. He stopped then. There was no point going back, he thought, and certainly nothing to be gained from staying put. He caught his breath for a moment, and then sighed. Onward. Onward he would go, till the path became clear again. Shit. Where did it go? My finger slipped out of a page holder I was holding on to, and it fell to the floor. Alright. The gloom of cloud was blown northwest to reveal a high silver moon glittering coldly. Phoebe, the name the moon was sometimes called. Rosamund liked that name, and her timely appearance allowed him to set his bearings. He had felt her there, hidden behind the clouds, felt her like the moving of the great ocean tides in his guts. Certain he was going in the right direction, he adjusted the valise once more and went on into the dangerous dark. As he walked, Rosamund heard every so often far-off shriekings or infrequent and muffled hoomings, and once a strange rumbling came from the east. Refusing to be thwarted by fear, the Foundling put his head down when he heard any of these noises, walking faster for a time, every sense tingling with terror. Eventually, he tired and then slowed, sure that he could go no further. He stopped for a moment, taking a sip from his biggin, and looked to the heavens to get his bearings. The great yellow-green star Maudlin had risen high and bright, proving how late it was, making him feel desperately weary. Putting away the water, he walked on. Excuse me. Excuse me. Alright, let's see. A black bulk appeared, silhouetted and obvious on this flat land. His heart leapt. The memory of the terrible beast he had glimpsed several nights earlier reared in his imagination. Ears ringing with tension, Rosamund crouched low and crept in a wide arc about the shadowy bulk. Several times he was sure, with the cold grip of dread, that it had moved, yet somehow it also stayed strangely still. He was almost upon it before he realized it was a haystack, right in the middle of the field. He nearly collapsed with relief. Instead of a threat, here was a place to rest. He staggered through plowed soil so soft it almost tripped him, flopped down on the leeward side of the haystack and burrowed into the straw, dragging the valise with him. He sagged, exhausted. Sleep came quickly, even when another shriek wailed a little too close. He slept. A numb ache in Rosamund's left shoulder, near where he had been shot, woke him. He rubbed his shoulder, but that only made it hurt more. Possibly bruising. He was still so very tired. He had survived his first night alone. Crawling cautiously out from his haystack burrow, he peered about. It was early morning. Okay, move that there. It was early morning. The sun barely over the horizon, showing against the pale sky were giant windmills marching away to the eastern horizon in long staggering rows. Although the very flatness of the land made him feel conspicuous, it also let him see if he was being followed. As far as the eye could see, in the early dawn, nothing moved on the field, on the road, or the fields, except the great sails of the mills. Forgive me, I seem to be stuttering quite a bit. Yet the fear of a patrol from the spindle still dogged him, and Rosamund struggled through the fields for an hour. Soon it became too wearisome to tread in the soft soil, and he was forced onto the road. He walked on and on, but met no one else. After a while, the way was intersected by a path. There was a single sign there, pointing down the main roadway. The Vestiveg, it said, or Vesting Way. The road to High Vesting. He was on the right road, and upon it he would stay. The day became unusually warm and remained so. A southeasterly breeze came, welcome and cool, as luggage and harness began to weigh on him. Eventually, the valise became too hard to carry on his back, and he resorted to towing it behind him by the straps, its metal bindings dragging dustily in the sandy gravel. With stubbornness beyond his years, he walked on steadily, his thoughts completely taken with reaching High Vesting. Stops were frequent, and Rosamund always looked furtively about as he rested. The boy found that he was not as alone as he first felt. Cows in sturdily fenced pastures lowed and chewed. Birds of many kinds, warbling magpies, shrilling mudlarks, tetching wagtails, and silent swallows dashed about, often calling, chasing off strangers, hunting insects that also flitted hither and thither. Of the insects, the bird's favorite seemed to be the large wurtem bottles. These fat black flies These fat black flies from warmer northern lands insisted on bumbling about Rosamund's face, neck, and especially his ears. No matter how often or how furiously he thrashed and shooed them, the wurtem bottles returned to their lazy harassment. There was a moment he stepped along that he thought he spied a person, a farmer perhaps, cutting across the fields far to his left. But he could not be certain who or what it was, and dared not call out. Other than this, the Grove had been eerily empty of any other traffic. Having grown up surrounded by people, crowded with them, he had thought space and solitude a golden prize. Now isolated and far from comfort, he wished very much to be pressed by the crowd once more. Onward, onward. He had to get to High Vesting. Fortunately, Rosamund still carried enough food to keep him from desperation, including the day's main meal, a sludge that used to be the dried must, and now almost glue-like rye bread. Crampon had once said that hunger was the best sauce. I think the actual term is the best seasoning or the best spice, but it's not wrong. When you're hungry enough, you will eat just about anything. Let's see. And Rosamund could not have agreed more as he took the bland slop with relish. The supper was still soggy enough to even whet his thirst. This was important, for although he had enough to eat, he had little water. Rosamund had filled his biggin with humorous dark water and tried to conserve it on the way. It tasted like composting leaves, yet by the unseasonably hot day's end, it was almost gone. He did not know exactly what would happen when one had no water, though he knew that it had to be bad. By sundown, he could see distant trees growing in scruffy stands along the road, and hoped a source of water might be among them. When he finally reached them, he discovered no water and so walked on. When, a mile later, he settled next to a cave-like gap between boughs of a huge boxthorn, he had drunk his last mouthful from the biggin. Huddled in the shelter of the lonely tree, Rosamund stared into the gathering dark with equally increasing disquiet. A nameless fear that something or someone dogged him made every shadow jump and loom. As the unfriendly night weighed down, punctuated as it was by distant, frightening noises, he sought to distract himself by humming happy, peaceful hymns, as he had heard Verlaine do for a troubled child. Still, the deep dark pressed. He hummed on softly, hoarse with thirst, until somehow he coaxed himself to sleep. A sound stirred him. It was early morning, the sky pale, the air still cold again. His throat rasped with pain, but he had survived a second night. The sound came again, unusual and out of place. Rosamund quickly blinked away the sleepy grit and listened. Morning birds welcoming the rising sun with their calls. These had not woken him. The buzzing of the Wharton bottles waiting for him to evacuate his thorny room. Neither had these. Then it came once more. This sound and remained getting louder. A jangling, steady clop, clop, clop. Then the unmistakable snort of a horse. The musketeers of the spindle have come for me. Come on. He turned his body and craned his head quietly as possible to see if he could catch sight of his pursuers through the spiny tangle of many intertwined boughs. Up on one elbow, neck stretched to straining, he did see something, and it was not a company of musketeers, but rather a landulet. An open four-wheeled carriage with a folding top drawn by a single heavy-looking and mud-brown nag. Forgive me, I felt I had to sneeze for a second there. It was being driven by a figure with a pronounced hunch, his face hidden behind the upturned collar of a dark maroon coachman's cloak, and beneath the shadow of a thrice high as almost matching color. Behind the driver reclined an elegant passenger of unclear gender, in clothes so fine that Rosamund could tell the refinement of their cut from his obscure vantage point. As the carriage came near, the elegant passenger called with the clear ring of an educated woman's voice. "Well, stop here if you must. You know I have places to be, and can't be troubled by every quibble or suspicion. But stop, I say, if it'll cease your twittering. According Unfortunately, the vehicle was pulled to a halt just before the boxthorn. Rosamund froze. There was a pause, and then the woman's voice spoke clearly again. "Go on then, I shall wait." The driver obediently got down and began to swing his head about as if searching, revealing his face, or what should have been his face. Instead, it was a rectangular wooden box pocked occasionally with small round holes. Darkus, could you get that?
Yeah, I got it. Hey Google, stop. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Instead, it was a rectangular wooden box pocked occasionally with small round holes on its front and two larger openings, one on the lower end of each side. Thick leather straps held it to his head. A Sthenicon. Rosamund stared, horrified. The driver was a Lear. Rosamund knew there was no escaping a Lear. The Sthenicon revealed every scent of every living thing, big or small, that moved within an area of a mile or more. What is more, they were reported to be able to see things everyday folk could not, to peer into secrets and search in hidden regions. The box-faced driver shuffled nearer to the overgrown boxthorn bush and peered within, his head swaying and poking forward. He became still. Rosamund sucked in a breath and lay very still, every nerve and fiber straining, waiting. How he wished he had not lost his cudgel. How he regretted the spoiled bother salts. Eventually, the box-faced driver stepped back to the laundelet and appeared to address the elegant passenger. As the latter leaned over, both heads nodded, at times with pronounced emphasis. A conclusion seemingly reached, the woman alighted from the carriage and straightened her fine clothing, stepped with determined poise over to where the driver had stood before the boxthorn. She wore the most luxurious and unusually cut frock coat of deep scarlet, buttoned and buckled at the side, and the shiniest, blackest equitier boots Rosamund had ever seen. The hem of the coat hung low and flared extravagantly, rustling as she approached. She stopped and squinted vaguely into the little grove. "In here, you say?" she asked over her shoulder. Her chestnut hair was gathered up behind her behind her crown in a bun, held with a pointed comb pinned by a long tine ending in a clenched crow's claw. Long wisps of flyaway fringe danced in small movement of air. Also, I did forget to mention, but there was a portrait whenever the Lear was shown. It is of the individual, and it has the title Licurious or Licurious. I'm not entirely sure. It is difficult to say. It is difficult to say what the proper pronunciation is without hearing it spoken. A frown, a sigh. She leaned forward. "You in there, little one," she called quite softly. Rosamund did not know what to do. "We've certainly no intention to harm you, so you can stop pretending you're not there and come out." Maybe she spoke the truth. Maybe she had water. Rosamund was about to act when his leg was gripped and tugged. Involuntarily, he screamed and kicked with his free foot. This too was grabbed, and he was pulled out from his hiding hole into the blinkingly bright morning, hanging upside down, valise and all, in the irresistible grip of the driver. Rosamund squealed like a little piglet, struggling violently, but all his twisting and writhing did not alter his position. "Put me down, you looby!" he sputtered. serving up the worst curse he knew. The box-faced driver ignored his almost foul language and carried him around to the roadside, where he held him out in much the same way someone might have held a frantic, just-caught fish. Rosamund continued to twist and writhe. The elegant woman approached him as someone might approach a cornered snake. Now, she soothed. Put him down, the curious. We've said we'd not harm him, so we had better not now, had we? As soon as his ankles were released, Rosamund scissored wildly with his legs for a moment to make sure they stayed free, then rolled over frantically and sprang to his feet. He looked left and right, hoping to dart away and escape. The woman regarded him closely for a long while, and he became still under her keen stare. Rosamund was not so young as not to see that she was a great beauty, but there was a hardness to her, and a darkness. It was then that he noticed a small blue mark over her left eye, a diamond-shaped spore. She was a Lazar, one of the fabled monster fighters who went to some far-off place to have secret surgeries done to their bodies. Secret surgeries that made it possible for them to do strange and terrible deeds and fight monsters. He knew immediately by the spore this elegant scarlet woman wore that her special talent was to generate and manipulate electricity and lightning. Among Lazars, this group were known as Fulgars. The Lady Fulgar smiled. The smell of her wafted about Rosamund. A strange scent, sweet, yet salty and sharp too. Hello, little man, she offered, in what was probably her kindliest voice. My name is Europe. This is my factotum, she said, indicating the box-faced driver. His name is Licurious. What do they call you? Rosamund did not answer. Europe pursed her lips, glanced at Licurious, and sighed. As I have said, we really have no thought of hurting you. Indeed, little man, you are of little consequence to us. I might care enough to help you, but not nearly so much as to hurt you. She gave a mirthless chuckle and then became serious. You see, I believe you have to particularly care about someone to put in the effort into harming them. Now tell me your name, what you've done that you can tell me. When you've done that, you can tell me what a little fellow like yourself is doing out here in the hinterlands without his hat. She smiled in a knowing way, an expression that promised either malice or friendship, depending upon what might happen next. For the briefest moment, Rosamund weighed his options. He relented and said, My name is Rosamund Bookchild, and I lost my hat in the river. I gave you your chance, boy. Europe was suddenly lit with powerful yet suppressed rage. If you're going to dash it with saucy nonsense, then this is where we part ways. She turned on her heel as if to leave, coat hem swirling. I fell off a boat bound for high vesting and swam ashore. Rosamund yelped in one frightened breath, and he continued almost as quickly. And my name really is Rosamund, and I know it's not the right kind of name for a lad, but I was given it while I was too young to argue, and now it is written in the ledger, and there's no going back on that. Europe stood still, cocked her head, and made a wry face. I'm a book child, a foundling, and I'm supposed to be in high vesting so I can start my job. And now I'm probably lost. I've got no water to drink, and Rosamund trembled on that awful verge where tears began and poise was lost. What's more, he had revealed more about himself than he had intended. He was sure that if Franzatard could see him now, his old dormitory master would be shaking his head in dismay. I see. The Fulgar pondered for a moment. You have very fine proofing for a foundling, little man. Did you happen to steal it? No, ma'am. Rosamund was simultaneously startled and offended. The Fulgar shrugged. Either way, maybe I can be of help to you after all. If it is water you need, there is plenty on the carriage. She paused sagely, then smiled an oddly cheeky smile. I could even do as much as cart you to high vesting if you would like. Though you will have to join me as I work. What do you think, the curious? Shall we aid this poor lost, well-dressed book child? You never know. With your poor eyesight, an extra pair of peepers could be handy on our way. The curious nodded just once. There you go. Europe kept grinning in mild triumph. So they climbed into the Landelot, all three, Licurius handing his mistress aboard, and set off down the Vesterweg once more. Rosamund's thoughts sang happily as he drank his fill of water, and the flat fields rocked by. Whatever anyone else said, he thought Lazars were the finest folk he had ever met. Well, that was quite a interesting one. And we get to meet a Fulgar, a Lazar. I figured we would, but I didn't expect it would be a traveling companion for our wayward lost book child. Still, very interesting. I'm curious what will be brought forward in the future, so I suppose all we can do is just wait and see. But in the meantime, I thank you all for joining me. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like and a comment down below with your thoughts and opinions on this story so far. And also make sure to share the video around. Even if this story is not to your preference, perhaps you might know someone who would enjoy it, and would enjoy reading along with me, perhaps. Either way, make sure to also subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell in order to be alerted whenever a new video goes up, and when Darkest goes live on this channel. In the meantime, I will see you all in the next video, and in the next chapter. I am Gresham's at arm, and I do hope you have a pleasant day.